Good morning, traders. Today is Thursday, June 30th. My name is Charles, and this is the Pirate Traders live stream. All right, well, yesterday we had what we would call a balancing day. The previous day we had a massive sell-off that created a lot of excess to the downside. Whenever you create a lot of excess, you often need to balance off that excess. But what they did is they balanced it lower. So instead of rotating around inside the previous day's range, they rotated around a little bit lower. And so what that tells us, with value being overlapping to lower, is we may be starting a new trend to the downside, right? Actually, let me just zoom out a hair more here. So value being lower from 2 days ago is a sign we might be starting a downtrend. Value being lower yesterday is a confirmation of the downtrend. So that makes me a little bit bullish this morning. Bearish, misspoke. That makes me a little bit bearish, a downtrend. It's not hard to get bearish in a bear market, obviously, as well. The larger momentum is bearish. So for me today, the only way to get bullish would be to get back up into yesterday's range and then push all the way through, basically where the overnight high is, this little node right here around 38.20. The only way I'll get bullish is if we can get back up through that and find support, looking for continuation higher to start repairing the weakness we left behind. Other than that, my assumption is either sideways or down today. Feeling a little bearish. So the first order of business with this gap down is an attempt to fill the gap. So the overnight inventory is net short. The first thing we're looking for this morning is a counter auction to that overnight inventory that is trying to push back up to yesterday's low to see if we can fill the gap. If we get up to yesterday's low and we find resistance there, that is what we call a gap and go, which is very, very bearish for continuation to the downside. Also, if we fail to fill that gap, so if the market opens and it tries to get up there and fill that gap and it can't, that is also a gap and go, which is bearish for continuation to the downside. Okay? As far as monitoring for continuation lower, we're back inside a previous balancing area. So you can see the market spent a bunch of time bouncing around in here. So it's going to be tricky. It's not like it's going to fall like a brick straight down to repair weak references. But I would say if we get below the overnight low, you could look for a very slow melt lower to try to fill the gap down to 37.12. Okay. And potential support, obviously, in this area where they found support in the overnight, once we repair these weak references we left behind from the 23rd. All right, they're going for the gap fill. First thing out the open. Can they do it? Can they get to yesterday's low? All right, so far it's a gap and go. They failed to fill that gap. So now we're looking to repair these weak references below 37.74.50. If that's repaired, it might be enough to bring in some buyers. If not, we monitor to the next weak reference lower, which is 37.71, and then look for support just below there once it's repaired. Okay, first week reference repaired. If that doesn't bring in the support, we'd look to repair the second week reference. I now remain bearish as long as we remain below the opening price for continuation to the downside. Okay, second week reference repaired. So here's the last bit of support for the market here. We are getting a liquidation, so we would expect the market to push back up looking for resistance. That resistance will likely be somewhere around here, 37.76. And of course, if they pass back through the opening price again, I am neutral for an attempt to fill the gap again. That is one gap trade setup that you can trade. It wouldn't interest me today just because of how big the gap was. But if they try to fill the gap, they pull back down, they make a new low, and then they start coming back up, you can enter at the opening price with a stop below the low, looking for the gap fill. But again, I wouldn't take that today, personally. All right, so here's where we're looking for resistance. Once again, if they break the overnight low, if they start to trade below the overnight low, come back up and get some resistance, the target is filling the gap down to 37.12, but it will likely be a very slow melt lower kind of day. They won't just drop like a brick. But the signal, if they get below that overnight low and get resistance, that's likely what they're trying to do. Scooball NQ gap filled? NQ. Yes, sir. They filled their gap. Oh, well, it was it was only a few points. Of course they filled it. Okay, so NQ, same as ES, is showing us a trend to the downside with value being lower or overlapping to lower. So that is bearish to see. NQ a lot closer to that old gap fill than the ES. So that's this gap here from the 17th to the 21st. Or sorry, from the 17th to the 21st. The 20th was one of those like random Mondays where the market was closed. So we don't count that. So to get that gap fill, you got to reach 11,396. But again, you got a lot of support in here. So they'll probably have to do a bit of grinding to get through it. But if they break that overnight low, come back up and find resistance, that is likely the target. Back to the the ES. Man, I swallowed some coffee down the wrong tube and it hurts. Ugh. All right, we're now below the overnight low. That is bearish. Okay, so now if we start to get resistance around this overnight low, market tries to push back up into that range, can't get up in there. That is the sign they want continuation to the downside. Man, these overnight shorts are holding on to their positions. That's pretty bearish. Kathy, next support at 37.40. That's the next like major node of support, but really this, as I mentioned earlier, this whole range, it's hard to kind of pick exact support and resistance levels, right? Because there's just so much. We spent so much time in here. Any one of these highs or lows could be support or resistance. Any major node could be support or resistance. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like we're in a bit of a chop zone here. So we got to just step back, right? Just calm ourselves and say, where is the market probably heading? Bigger picture. It's probably going to try to fill that gap. So I'm more focused on the momentum. Can they keep that momentum going until we fill that gap? Also, something that's popping out to me right now as I zoom out, doesn't necessarily have to happen today. I mean, it won't happen today, but we've also got these weak references down here, and they correspond nicely with the next major node on the cumulative, right? The market often moves from this node. Where did it go? Straight up to this node. And then when it failed to get higher, where did it go? Straight back down to this node, right? So there's a higher probability if we don't find support at this gap that over the next few days, we're heading down to this node here to test the lows. But anyway, that's getting way ahead of ourselves. For now, let's just focus on the momentum this morning and the target of filling that gap. Okay, so looking for resistance once again on the overnight low. Remember, it's going to be a slow grind down. It's not going to be a straight drop. Pavel M low repair. M low repair. M from what? From yesterday? Oh, yeah. When we open below a weak reference, it's repaired. So the poor low, obviously, from yesterday is no longer poor. It's just a low. Yeah, so if, just for the sake of educational purposes, with that weak M period low that we had there, if the overnight had traded below it and then pulled back above, it would still be weak when we opened the next day. But if we open below it, then the regular trading hours, we think about that like the regular trading hours passed through it and repaired it. Now the weakness above remains, but the weakness that was below is now repaired. All right. Well, those overnight traders just lost confidence. So that gives the market a chance to get back to the zero line on the ticks, at least on the ES. Q is pretty bearish here. Which is when we can find out, are there new sellers piling on, trying to take the market lower? So resistance once again at the overnight low. Alex, resistance or support? Let's find out. Do the ticks get punched in the face? Or can they work their way back above that zero line? Oh, did I say support when I meant resistance? So it's resistance at the overnight low, support inside the range, inside the balance area. So if what I was talking about was this stuff over here, I was talking about, whoops. If I was talking about this stuff over here, I was talking about support. If I was talking about this right here, I was talking about resistance. Oh, sorry, was my mic off? Yeah, so just saying, it's not buyers, like strong hands buyers right now. This is just the market working its way through that previous support. So it's, like I said, it's not going to drop like a brick. It's going to slowly grind its way lower. And every time you're going to think, oh, there's the buyers. And then they're just going to get slapped down again. And you're going to think, oh, there's the buyers. And they're just going to get slapped down again. So just focus on the momentum. Ask yourself the question, okay, so what signals do we have that the market wants to go lower? Right? Well, we have value being lower. Now 4 days in a row. That's a sign the market wants to go lower. We got a gap and go today. That's a sign the market wants to go lower. We pushed below the overnight low, came back up, found resistance. That's a sign the market wants to go lower. So why on earth would it just randomly stop right here? What's so special about this level? So we have to ask ourselves, okay, where's the liquidity? Where are the big buyers, the strong hand buyers, the ones that are going to hold those longs? Where are they at? They might be here in this little node of support, right? It's worked in the past, but probably more likely they're waiting for that gap to fill. Probably there's a bunch of people who want to go long down here. And the market is always working its way to wherever the liquidity is. So it won't be able to go straight there. But as long as the momentum continues to the downside, that's probably where they're going, looking for that liquidity. But I have a feeling all day long they're going to make you think they're about to reverse it and then slap those ticks right back down. Because that's what they used to do on the way up in a bull market. And it turns out the bear market works the same in the opposite direction. All right, so with the low at 37.46, we may get a little support for a bounce, looking for resistance and continuation lower. Oh, the Q just got its gap fill. All right, so that should bring in some buyers here on the Q. Heading back up towards this node at the overnight low for resistance. Of course, if they don't get a bounce here, that's a when what should happens doesn't. That's more bearish. Screwball, a weak A low. Yep, both markets. Low's weak. Michael, I made my first MES trade today after going through your course and Dalton's. How did it go? Was it a winner? All right, well, that was a very minor bounce on a gap fill for the Q, so that's a little bit bearish to see. Next major support for the Q is going to be around 11,337. For the ES, 3740. $10. Nice, my man. Well done. The first of many, I hope. Michael, easier to trade than BTC? Yeah, definitely if you're day trading, for sure. Speaking of which, what is the corn doing this morning? 18. Oh, shit. Any predictions from the chat on what the floor is on the Bitcoin? I was looking at like 12 like a month ago and thinking it couldn't go lower than that. Or I guess it was, yeah, it was 12.8. Okay, so once again, we're pushing to some support. We could look for a little bounce here. Looking for resistance. Screwball says 10K. Cortman, nada. Well, that's impossible. Nunez, 0. Again, impossible. It's a silly concept. Caffeine is saying 14. Neil, 0. Again, all you guys saying 0. It can't go to 0. It's literally impossible. There's so much Bitcoin that's like tied up in old wallets and stuff where people lost the, lost the access or whatever. There's no way it could go to actual 0. Matthew, 12K. Man, it's so interesting how different everyone's opinion on Bitcoin is. Chilling with okay, 125. Well, for what it's worth, I disagree with all of you bears. Okay, so NQ getting close to that support, right around 13,340. Looking for a little bounce. Nunez, what's going on with all the people that have margin calls at 20K? Well, that was supposed to be MicroStrategy, and that was a lie. There's no margin call. They bought more. They just bought like another 200 or something 2 days ago. M. Wilson, this slow melt action is hard to read because every 2 minutes it looks like it's reversing and then it dumps again. Yeah, that's why I said, it's better to kind of just force yourself to zoom out a little bit and just recognize what's happening. The momentum is to the downside. So why are strong hand buyers who want to reverse this market and take it back up, why are they going to buy right here? Right? What's so special about this moment? Luca, I found the cessation a very good edge. Thank you for that. Well, don't thank me. Thank Jim Dalton. I mean, he's the one that spent like 20 years staring at these charts every day to figure this stuff out. He's the one that experimented with like every possible time frame. Should we be using 5-minute TPOs or 22-minute TPO or what? Like, he's the one that figured out the formula that it's the 30-minute candles and that's where the trend is measured. But he says it especially helps in the overnight session. I'm from Europe. It is easier to make that play overnight rather than regular trading hours. Yeah, you're right. Actually, the overnight tends to have really long trends that like last for hours and hours and hours. I have 2 questions for you. Would you consider to trade cessation if profile didn't leave a good high or low? Would you consider to trade cessation if the profile didn't leave a good high or low? Can you rephrase that? I'm not sure what that means. Oh, here you already did. Let's say the market is one time framing down and all of a sudden it reverses above the previous letter, but it left a weak low behind. Would you consider that a play? Yes, but I would look for it later, right? So like, let's say the market is trending lower. It stops like right at a previous, yesterday's high or something, right? Like a previous level, leaving behind a weak reference. Then it heads up and it gets cessation. My assumption would be rotation, right? But I would be aware that there's a weak reference there. So if it rotates down, I might say to myself, okay, I'm not going to buy this yet, because there's that weak reference that needs repair. I'll wait and see what happens. Odds are it's just going to repair it and then pull right back up. So I'll wait and see. Is that what happens? If it does, I can get into my long trade then. I can wait until it's proven. And if it doesn't, if it repairs that weak low and then it comes back up and it gets resistance, I know I should short it for a breakout of rotation. Yeah, and Luca, it's also worth mentioning, I don't trade the overnight, so I can't guarantee you that the market functions the same in the overnight that it does in the regular trading hours. There's like a lot of mechanisms at play in the regular trading hours that kind of cause it to do certain things, and a lot of those are turned off in the overnight. So I'd be interested to see, how often once the overnight goes rotational, and you can let me know it stays that way, and how often it just rotates for like a few hours and then breaks out. All right, so we're looking for resistance. Looking for those ticks to get slapped down once again. We do have good taper on the, good taper on the low. All right, resistance. Michael, have I experimented with the other TPOs? No, I have not. Because I asked that same question to Jim Dalton, and he said, I've already experimented with all the others, and the 30-minute worked the best. All right, well, we're getting some support. Getting some new buyers stepping in here. So I remain bearish as long as we're below the overnight low. But if we start to push back up into that overnight range, I will go neutral. And if we get back through the opening price again, I'll be bullish for a gap fill. But I don't think that's very likely. I think we got some sellers waiting up here. Waiting to punch these buyers right in the chin. John Q, NQ, I think we're heading to 11,300. Sure. You got a little support above that though, like 11,317. But look at that momentum. Boy, is that to the downside. Tuttle, can you explain monitoring for continuation if I was short in the current context? Thanks. Right. Perfect question. So you're short the market right now, and you believe that the momentum is to the downside and that it's going to keep going. But you recognize that there's a lot of support in here and that it's not going to go straight down. It's going to have to do this. It's going to have to grind its way lower. But you say to yourself, I don't want to play the game of like get in, get out, get in, get out. I just want to get in a short and just take it all the way to the end, take it to the target. How do I do that? Well, it's what we call monitoring for continuation. So the first thing you need to have is a level in mind where your trade idea is wrong. That's your stop, okay? Unfortunately, if you got short right now, you'd have to have kind of a wide stop because you'd want to use the overnight low as potential resistance. So that's the first thing you're asking yourself is like, if it turns around and goes back up, where do I know I'm wrong? Okay, if we start to trade back up into that overnight range, I'm wrong. Great. So that's the first thing you think about. Then the second thing you ask yourself is, where is the potential support or potential targets to the downside? So let's just say, hypothetically, we had some weak references in here. That was weak, and then that was weak right there, right? You'd be saying to yourself, okay, I'm going to stay in my short as long as we're below the overnight low. And then when we come down here and we repair this first weak reference, I'm going to monitor. I'm going to look very closely. I'm not going to take profits there, right? Like we normally would. Normally you'd want to just take profits and then sell the next bounce for continuation lower, but you're monitoring. So instead of actually taking profits at the repair, you're just watching the market and asking yourself, once we repair that, does the market come back up and get resistance, or is it able to just take off? Was that all it needed to do? If that was all it needed to do, as soon as you make that decision, boom, you're out of the trade. You're out of the short right then and there. But if it gets the resistance, if it comes down there and it repairs that weak reference and then it comes back up and new sellers start piling on, well, you just stay in your trade. And then you watch it come down to the next level and you do that again. You ask yourself, was that enough support for the market to recover? If not, you stay in your trade and you watch it go to the next one. And you just keep doing that as long as it keeps going lower. And the general principle is it's sometimes easier to just stay in a trade than it is to get back in one if you take profits. So if you got short and took profits right at the first weak reference, and there were multiple weak references down here, you might be too scared to get back into the short to go repair the others. And then you miss out on making the money in between. So monitoring for continuation allows you to stay in and maximize the profits you get out of that trade. Patrick, would you consider the B low poor week, even with 400 contracts, even though it's only 20% of the next price up? You're not asking about poor week. You're asking about taper in volume. Poor week has to do with it coming within a tick of a previous reference. So it is not poor or weak. It's got good excess to the downside. But the taper is what you're talking about. And yes, I would consider that good taper. You can't get too exact with it. You just want the numbers going lower. So 5,000, 3,000, 2,400, that's good taper. But it feels like these sellers will head back down there and do some more business here in a bit. Cortman, if you had to teach a complete noob trading, like zero knowledge, where would you start? That's such a great question. I've thought about that before too. Like, because I've had friends ask me, like when they see how much money I make, they're like, can you teach me how to do that? And I think to myself, could I teach them? And I don't have a good answer, because I feel like even though the way I trade right now is super simple, like it's very, very simplistic, I don't know. Like, I feel like it took years and years of making mistakes and being wrong to like get to a point where I understood it simplistically, if that makes sense. So I would say if I had somebody who was brand new, knew nothing about markets, who wanted to learn to trade, yeah, I don't know. It's a great question. I'd probably tell them to treat it more like a video game, to not think it all about fundamentals, to not ever try to understand why the market's doing what it's doing, but instead just learn the pattern recognition of understanding what it's doing in the moment, you know? I also think one big mistake that people make, this is just me randomly talking now. I also think one big mistake people make when it comes to trading is they think it's about maximizing their knowledge. Like, they think the more stuff I learn, the more courses I take, the more indicators I learn to read, the more this, the more that, the better I'll be. And I don't actually think it works like that. You know what I mean? It's about mastering what you know, not continuing to add more and more to it. So like, you could teach somebody how to play 8 chords on guitar and they could become Jimi Hendrix. You know what I mean? Like, they don't need all the like instruments and pedals and this and that. They don't have to study classical theory and blah, 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 blah. Like, they can just, through practice, through experience, they can take a very small amount of knowledge and just become an expert at it, become very, very good at it. And I think, at least day trading, that's the way you do it. All right, well, the C period is here, which means it's time for us to say goodbye. Thank you guys for the whole 49 likes today. Appreciate that. So if you're not a member of the brigade, I'll be back tomorrow morning. If you are, I'll see you in the private stream. And once again, I remain bearish below the overnight low. Even if the C period gets above the B, I remain bearish below the overnight low. Neutral between the overnight low and the opening price, meaning it could just rotate. Whoops. Just like yesterday inside the initial balance. Damn it. There we go. It may just do one of these, you know? So I'm neutral if we get back up into the overnight for this type of deal, for like a sideways move. But if we get back above the opening price, okay, right in here, I would be looking for a gap fill to yesterday's low. So that would get me bullish for a gap fill, looking for resistance there. But I remain bearish below the overnight low. Thank you guys so very much, and we'll see you here tomorrow morning.